Sniper is the best tower in the game that isn't bugged. But there's two more towers that haven't been mentioned yet, and I think a lot of you know what they are. The broken tier.
This is Obama! Get down!
Ninja and Dartling. So, you don't need me to tell you these towers are broken, but what I am going to do is I'm going to try to explain how they're broken in as much detail as possible, because there's a lot of confusion around it. So, the Dartling is broken because of Laser Shock. Laser Shock is currently bugged to stack more than intended. It's most noticeable when you get Hydra Rocket Pods, where the Laser Shock stacks way more than intended. The 230 Dartling is able, if you haven't already seen, to essentially solo any amount of any kind of balloon. It doesn't matter how many balloons you send it, unless you're on a really short map, or your opponent, or you send your opponent constant fortified ceramics. They'd have to be constant fortified ceramics that you're really spamming at your opponent and boosting. Unless you do that, you cannot kill Dartling with any amount of balloons once it hits 230. You could only kill them with Moabs. Even then, once you get it to a Rocket Storm, the ability should deal with up to Zongs quite easily. And then once bad start come in, you can just get them mad. The only thing that might cause trouble is fortified DDTs. Even then, there are a decent amount of things that can counter DDTs quite well that will usually be run with Dartling. Go Sniper, main Moab, you'll see a lot of that to help counter that weakness of the Dartling. So yeah, the Dartling basically has no weakness except early fortified Moabs, which even then, if played correctly, it can counter very powerfully with a Rocket Storm. So yeah, busted as hell. Essentially what I believe is happening is, what we know for sure is that the 230 is making Laser Shock trigger too many times. It's not explaining why yet, but what we seem to think it is at the moment is that it counts the explosions as Laser Shock multiple times. I think it counts one Laser Shock for the missile hitting the balloon, and then another Laser Shock for the explosion. But then as well as that, there are multiple explosions in the missile, and the missile also hits multiple times, and I think it's only supposed to count one Laser Shock for each one of those, but instead it's counting 6 Laser Shocks for each missile. One for the missile hitting 3 times, and one for the explosion 3 times, obviously 3 plus 3 is 6. I think that's what's happening. I'm not sure. I could be wrong. So anyway, that's how the Dartling's broken. The way the Ninja is broken is more complicated, and actually there's a few people who might not be aware of this. The way the Ninja is broken is Sticky Bomb, which is usually a pretty bad upgrade. It has been buffed quite a few times in the past, and it's now not so trash, but it's now actually completely broken if you abuse a bug with it. You see, the main reason Sticky Bomb is bad is that even though it does a lot of damage to Moabs, and you can throw them relatively regularly, it can only stick on one Moab at a time, and you have to wait like 2-3 seconds for it to actually blow up and hit the Moab before you can stick another one on. It's intended to never stack. It's intended to never stack. However, it can stack. Now, this is where I got confused, because once I heard that, I'm like, oh, okay, that's busted. I'll just start spamming Sticky Bombs. And I did that, and it didn't work. And I'm like, wait, what? Wait. That was awful. It didn't even defend DDTs, not even fortified DDTs. Wait, I've seen people defend multiple fortified bads on round 38 with Sticky Bombs. Like, how is it doing this bad? And I couldn't figure out what had changed, like why this wasn't working, but I'd seen other people abusing the hell out of it and it being one of the most stupid sources of bad damage in the game. And I thought, maybe it's just the fact that I don't have Master Bomber yet. But, while that is definitely a part of it, I figured out what it is by going into Sandbox mode in BTD 6, because it turns out the same bug is actually present in BTD 6 at the moment. And I actually used it to beat chimps on off the coast, just as a fun little test of it. And it is a very powerful bug. So essentially, it can stack, but only under certain conditions. And you're going to get confused here, don't worry. It's really, really weird. There's multiple bugs actually here happening at once. So, the idea is that the Ninja should have this bug happen when it throws a Sticky Bomb on a Moab, but then before the Sticky Bomb actually lands on the Moab, it manages to throw another Sticky Bomb. And then, even though it's being told, hey, don't throw any more Sticky Bombs, you've already stuck one on this Moab, it's obviously already thrown the second one, so the second one will also stick to the Moab. And you won't see 2 on the Moab, because there's only one graphic in the game showing 1 Sticky Bomb stuck to it. So you'll only see 1 Sticky Bomb, but there's actually 2. But then, the game recognizes this most of the time, and says, wait, hang on a minute, there shouldn't be 2 Sticky Bombs on here. And although you'll still see 2 explosions, only one of the explosions will actually damage the Moab. And so this is what really confused me at first, because I'm like, wait, so the bug doesn't work, it's just visual. It's just a visual glitch. You know, you see the explosion, but it doesn't actually do the damage. I checked the pop counter. Well, this is where it gets extra confusing. So that happens at first. It seems like that's something they coded in to try and deal with the bug, where if it realizes there's 2 explosions really close together, it ignores some of them. However, if you manage to throw more than just 2 stickies onto the same Moab, and there's enough of a gap between the first explosion and the last explosion, it does actually count some of them. So, I'm not sure if this is an exact conversion, but from what I found, it seems that for every 3 stickies you manage to throw on a Moab, one of them will count. So if you throw 4 stickies on a Moab, it will probably get 4 explosions and only 2 of them will count. If you throw like 6, same, 2 of them will count, but you'll see 6 explosions. 7, you'll probably see 7 explosions, but only 3 of them will count. You get the idea. So this is really weird, but that just seems to be the way it works. Another thing as well is it gets even more confusing once you start factoring multiple sticky bombs. I haven't been able to properly figure out, because of how confusing this bug is, whether it does work, like stacking more sticky bombs, like getting multiple sticky bomb ninjas, whether it actually increases the damage or not, because I tested it out, and if you have 2 sticky bombs next to each other, one throws 1 sticky bomb onto the mob, the other one throws the other one, then you'll see 2 explosions, but the first sticky bomb ninja's explosion will deal no damage. So having 2 sticky bombs will deal the same amount of damage as having 1 sticky bomb, because the second one will just cancel out the first one. If anything, you'll actually reduce the damage. But then I have seen people spamming multiple sticky bombs and still getting loads of damage, so I don't know if that's like under certain conditions it doesn't break. It's such a weird bug. So I don't understand. I completely understand the confusion around it. It's insane how bugged this upgrade is. I'm trying to think if it's the only upgrade in BTD 6 that has literally never not been bugged. Because even from the start of the game, it used to be bugged to be laughably bad, where if you applied any damage over time effect onto a Moab, or any kind of glue effect, anything like that, while the sticky bomb was on there, then the sticky bomb would still visually be there, but it would actually completely cancel out the damage of it. Now that bug has been fixed by now, I believe. I sure hope it's been fixed, but now we got this bug. So yes, to cut a long story short, to abuse this bug in the best possible way, what you need to do is you need to have a ninja. You need to have it be throwing sticky bombs at its target from as far away as possible to maximize the amount it can throw before the sticky bombs actually land on its target. And it has to have as much attack speed as possible to increase the amount it can throw in a certain amount of time. This means you should get 104 ninjas, and you should also buff them with as many shinobi ninjas as possible. If possible as well, you can make this effect super pronounced using overclock. Now the thing is, you might be wondering, wait, if this is so ridiculously hard to set up, if this bug is so intricate, so finicky, so situational, how does it make ninjas this broken? How are they this easy to abuse? It mostly comes down to the fact it's battles. In battles, you obviously have battle energy, and you can at any time increase the attack speed of every tower on your screen. Usually in BTD 6, you would have to set up a whole bunch of shinobis, set up a jungle drum, set up an overclock to actually get a decent amount of increased damage off this bug, which is probably why the bug still exists in BTD 6. Even though it's in there, it's very hard to abuse. However, in battles, because of the fact that you have battle energy to be able to use at any time on top of the attack buffs you have, and shinobi ninjas only stack 10 times in battles but cost more, I believe the attack speed increase in battles is more, I think. So you don't have to put in as much work to get a fully buffed shinobi sticky bomb. It means that it's nowhere near as difficult to get the bug to happen and actually get way more damage than intended off of it. So yeah, and yes, if you do get multiple sticky bombs, the damage is stupid. It's not like a small increase, it's stupid increase. Like, when I tried it out, like abusing it on chimps on off the coast, I placed a Master Bomber all the way in the top right corner with 20 Shinobi Ninjas, a Jungle Drums buff, and an Overclock. And I'll put it this way, I went into free play just for a bit as well afterwards, and to see how far it would get. And before it died, it got nearly 4 million pops. To put this in perspective, there is only just barely over 2 million in the entirety of round 1 to round 100. So, yeah, they got nearly double the amount of balloons that there even are in a Chimps game in like 100 and... I think I only got it at like round 80 as well, so in just like round 80 to round 107, which I think was the round I died on, it got double the amount of balloons popped than there are in the entirety of Chimps mode. So yeah, it's a big damage buff if you can abuse it.
And with that, we've covered every tower on the tier list now. Right? Well, yes, technically we have, however, there's still some more to cover. Firstly, movements, because I'm actually about to rearrange this tier list a little bit. Now overall, I didn't go into this not feeling sure about my decisions. For the most part, just about every tower I felt pretty confident about where I put them. But obviously, no one can really claim to be able to predict everything that's going to happen with absolute accuracy. So even with pretty strong confidence with most of my picks, some of them I'm gonna have to move. So let's get the big one out of the way now. I was wrong about the Heli. Kind of. Okay? Again, I want to reiterate, I do like the Heli as a tower. This is not a grudge I have against the Heli itself. This is not a grudge I have against Heli users. As I say, in fact, Moab Shove is one of my favourite upgrades to use in BTD 6. But that was also the reason I was wrong about the Heli, because I was pretty confident Moab Shove would be useless in battles. Again, because the main use I got out of Moab Shove was using it to massively delay having to actually buy real Moab defense, allowing me to be much greedier, especially in chimps mode, and get discount villages at times where I really shouldn't be able to buy them without dying. And I thought, take that into battles when your opponent can just send you mobs whenever they want, and all they'll do is just send you more than one Moab and overwhelm your Moab Shove easily, and then you'll just die. And I mean, that makes a lot of sense in theory, and that was why I was pretty confident Heli would be E tier, especially when I found out that even Apache was worse than I remembered it to be, and actually it wouldn't even be carried by Apache. In fact, once I learned that, I was even considering moving it to F tier. But then one thing which I had already disregarded as not important came back to bite me, and that was Chinook farming. Now, I didn't not give Chinook farming... No, it wasn't that I didn't give Chinook farm... Oh my god, that's so fucking hard to say. Now, it wasn't that I didn't give Chinook... That's so hard to say. Now, it wasn't that I didn't give Chinook farm... Oh my fucking god. Now, it wasn't that I didn't give Chinook farming... Okay, that's like the 10th or so take. I'm just taking it at this point. It wasn't that I gave Chinook farming that... didn't give it enough thought. I did genuinely consider it because I realised that just about any tower in BTD battles which would be able to make money on a timer-based ability would instantly be viable in theory. But the real reason I was looking at the Heli and thinking even with an ability like this, I don't even think they make it into D tier, was because the Chinook just seemed like the obvious worst farming option. Druids were cheaper to get up initially, which means that you can start greeding with them earlier, and snipers make more for what you spend on them, while also being probably the best and most variable defense at the same time as money making. Meanwhile, the Chinook has a high upfront cost, very little defensive capabilities of its own, with the most useful thing probably being the blowback, and on top of that, not necessarily great money making with the extremely long ability cooldown. All these just seem to come together to make it look like a pretty damn useless tower. And yet, Chinook farming became a kind of anti-meta strategy that actually became very popular. Now, I realise just because it's the worst farming option based on abilities, it wasn't going to be just useless because of that on its own, because every farming option based off of ability timers should be viable, right? Well, the only thing I was thinking is, the only reason you would pick Heli over Druid or Sniper is if the Heli had some other upgrade on some of its paths that you really wanted alongside the farming. Otherwise, you would just run the better farming option. And as I said, I felt like the main weakness of the Heli was I just looked at its upgrades and I'm like, what do you want here in a game of battles? You want Downdraft, I guess, and you want Apache, I guess, and then I found out you didn't even want Apache. And I was like, well, Moab Shove is going to be pretty useless because they'll just overwhelm you with grouped Moabs, and then you're going to lose. And the 5th tiers seem pretty underwhelming. So all those factors combined, it seemed like, yes, it did have a farming option, but not only was it the worst farming option out of the ability-based ones, but on top of that, it was for a tower that had no other useful upgrades, so it couldn't even be well, it might not be as good as the other farming options, but you know, you can still pick it and it still provides some unique qualities. It seemed like it didn't actually provide any unique qualities that would at all be relevant to winning a game. And then of course, Moab Shove out of nowhere ended up being amazing. All that said though, where am I going to move Heli? C tier. Top of C tier, but C tier. Now, I imagine there's a decent amount of Heli users who might still be mad I put it in C tier, especially because I put things like the Mortar, the Alchemist, the Druid, all that in B tier. Well, let me explain. At first, when I first saw Helis being used as an anti-meta tower that was actually quite popular, and people were saying it worked, I was extremely skeptical that it really worked, especially because I was seeing a lot of YouTube games from channels like Asian Sensation where they were doing some very cool stuff and they were winning the games and there was some skillful play going on. But I would notice that when I'd look back and I'm like, damn, why did that work? I realized that the opponent's rushes were often very stupid. Like, the thing that Moab Shove struggles against is multiple Moab targets to push back. The slowdown goes from absolutely absurdly powerful to absolutely uselessly pathetic if you just make it so it has to deal with more than one target. And yet I kept seeing people in these videos sending single fortified zongs at Moab Shoves, just thinking, what the hell are these opponents doing? So I was, at first, still sticking with my E tier placement. I was like, yes, people are doing well with Heli farms, but that's just because these opponents are idiots. And I don't usually like to hold like stuck up positions like that, so even though I felt like that had to be the case, I was also looking into how I could be wrong. And I feel like what I found in the end is that I was half wrong. It's definitely true that it is absolutely stupid for people to expect fortified zongs, only one or two of them at least, to get through a Moab Shove defense. But I realized there wasn't no reason why players weren't rushing Helis with more. The reason that I had in my head they weren't doing that was only part of the puzzle. And what I thought it was that we are in an over-defensive meta right now because of the fact that Dartling and ninjas are so overpowered that they can carry you through the entire game and get through fortified bads. And that means that the best players that win the most games and get to the highest ranks aren't necessarily the smartest players. Usually they're the most defensive players who are running Dartling Ninja Super or Dartling Ninja Sniper or whatever. Because of that, players are being conditioned to be more defensive than they should be, and also some players who don't have the rush knowledge to realistically make it to top ranks are making it there because rush knowledge is less important in this meta. So my past self was half right about this idea that players just weren't good, because yes, they should definitely be rushing with more. They clearly don't know how to rush if that's how they're rushing a Heli player. However, it also comes down to another factor, actually getting the money to rush them. Which, I mean, I thought that wouldn't be too hard. Yeah, you gotta send multiple things, but what does a Heli player do if you do send multiple things? Like, they have to start selling all their Chinooks just to get up an actual real defense. And yes, that means they probably won't die to your rush if they're a good player, but even if they pull off the defense, then they've just gone and sold their entire income they've been building up for the entire game. So I really thought it seemed like when you play out this flowchart, any single time you actually commit to a rush instead of half-arsing it, it seemed like there's no way a Heli player could actually survive it without permanently crippling their income so they won't be able to survive the next rush. But then the second part came in, and I started to realize something. Now, I already realized this, but I don't feel like I fully realized just how true it was. That one of the only reasons that Heli was so popular is because it was a counter to Dartling players. And specifically Dartling players. And at first I just meant that in the sense that Dartling players were too dumb to rush Helis correctly, because they have been conditioned to play way too defensively. But as well as that, there is another factor to it. Genuinely, the way Dartling's game plan looks is there is one weak point, and I've hammered this in a decent amount. The only point in the game at which a good Dartling player can realistically die is if someone hits them with a highly committal, basically all-in rush of fortified Moabs early in the game when they can't afford to rocket storm spam. Even then, if they're running a tower like Boomerang or sometimes even just spiked balls with it, they can still get their way out of it. But the bottom line is that the point in the game at which a Dartling player has to be the most careful is round 18. And that's kind of when it clicked for me. I realized, well, actually, then it kind of does make sense that Dartling players don't rush Heli. The best time to rush them would be when you can send multiple Moabs. But obviously then your opponent can also send multiple Moabs at you. And both of you will die if you get sent multiple Moabs, but with Moab Shove, you're going to be the one that dies first, not the Heli player. So you could only send them a Moab Rush if you could not only spend the money on the Moab Rush, but then feel confident that if you get Moab Rushed yourself, you're not going to die. And 90% of the time, Dartling players can't have that confidence because that's the one part of the game in which they're actually kind of vulnerable. So while I've been looking at ways to try and counter Dartling by taking advantage of the fact that it's weak on 18 by actually trying to rush them on 18, Heli's kind of goes the opposite direction, not by actually rushing them on 18, but using the threat that they could be rushed on 18 to prevent them from being rushed. at the time where they actually could be rushed and killed. Yes, you could rush them with 4 or 5 BFBs when you've got a bit more money and a bit more time, but then if you do that, not only are they a little bit slower, but also they only come 2 rounds after Moabs. So you won't have much time to save up money to actually put in enough 4 or 5 BFBs that it will be a significant difference. So what can you do then? Just wait another 2 rounds until you have enough money. And by that point, it's already fortified zongs. And fortified zongs are expensive. It's really hard to get enough money to send multiple of them, and if you do get enough money, you could spend that money on a 5th tier. And then it finally really started to come together. I would still say it's possible to kill Heli players with a good rush at the right time, and they have literally nothing they can do about it. But I'm starting to see why people don't do it, because essentially it is a risky strategy. And while I still think it is the best strategy, and I still think it should demolish Helis if you do this, it is a strategy that isn't foolproof and is on top of that very offensive when defensive strategies are the name of the game right now, so the top players aren't so experienced with playing in an offensive way. So yeah, basically the reason I put it at the top of C is that I think it's a bit of both. I do think that a decent amount of it is just people's inexperience with being able to counter Helis and actually send them the correct kind of rushes that actually will overwhelm them. I mean, although I say, oh, but then it's fortified zongs, so it's too late, that doesn't mean you can't send fortified BFBs. It's definitely uncommon, but I definitely think that you could certainly just wait until round 22 or 23, but then not send zongs, just send a whole bunch of fortified BFBs, and I think that Heli players would just cry when they see that. But at the end of the day, I also can't deny there's more risk to playing that way, it takes more skill, and on top of that, it's never guaranteed to work. It all comes down to how much you can save money for that moment, and depending on how well the Heli player's been harassing you, maybe you can't make enough money for that moment to make the rush work. So while before I felt like the Heli was a gimmick just taking advantage of stupid people who are carried high by Dartlings, I'm starting to realise that Helis are a genuine counter to Dartling, not just in a psychological way. Not to mention that Mob Shove does kind of serve the same role as it does in BTD 6 now. It does actually allow you to greed just like it does in BTD 6 and get income up earlier, which is why it works so well with the Shinnocks. Because of the fact that people often can't commit to a rush early enough, and by the time they can, they struggle to send multiple at you, it means you can go a really long time with a really bad defense with a Heli loadout just to get up money, and then you'll have a lot of stalling power, so if a rush does come at you at the wrong time, you can just sort of delay it until you can actually get enough money to properly defend it. So I think it's pretty fair to put a strategy that works, but would definitely crumble to all-ins if they go against a player that has the balls to do them, at the top of C tier. The next one that gets moved is Engineer, which is moving from high A tier to nearly the top of S tier. So you might be kind of surprised that Engi wasn't already in S tier from the beginning on my list. And like I said before, I could see it going anywhere from B to S on that list. I'm actually not even that surprised it ended up in S. But I don't think I could have confidently said it was definitely going to be S before. At the end of the day, a lot of it came down to, is Bloom Trap going to stay this good, or are people going to learn to play against it? And obviously, it stayed this good. And I know this might sound pretty dumb, of course it stayed this good. But let me explain why I thought that it would probably be countered at some point. We already knew that income from snipers or druid, and now even helis, were all viable income options that could completely counter engineer traps just by, you know, not building their eco, not sending balloons, and just building eco off of their own money-making abilities. And that, like, is a serious hit to engineer if they go against a loadout that has just one tower that can make a decent amount of money on its own. Like, that seriously hurts engineer. You spend like nearly 5,000 on a balloon trap in total for all its upgrades, and then after all that, you might make 700 off it once and then no more money ever again if the opponent's running a loadout like that, and that's abysmal. That might sound melodramatic, but really, it is hard to get a trap up in time a lot of the time. The only way you can really guarantee you're going to get your money's worth from a trap, regardless of what loadout that your opponent is bringing, is to make sure you've got a balloon trap by round 5. And you have to play insanely greedy and cripple your early game eco to do that. And on top of all that, it's not even possible on a decent amount of maps if your opponent just, you know, sends the right balloons at you. I'm not saying this to say balloon trap is bad, I'm just explaining why I feel like there was a genuine possibility we could have eventually realized, wow, balloon trap's really bad, we overrated it. Because there is a lot of counterplay to it. And if balloon trap became prevalent enough, I thought that surely eventually people would just learn to use these loadouts that screw over balloon trap. But in the end, balloon trap has kept its dominance, mostly because balloon trap players have just responded by, well, being more aggressive. It seems like a lot of engineer players now do go straight for the balloon trap on round 5. And as well as that, I'm seeing a lot less sniper on ladder, and not that much druid either. In fact, even though I'm seeing a lot of heli farms on YouTube, I'm not really seeing many in the actual game. And heli farms aren't as much of a problem for engineers anyway, because they take longer to get up. But then that's not all. If it was just that balloon trap turned out to be as good as it could have potentially been, and not actually a counterable upgrade, then I would have just been like, I think it just barely makes it into the bottom of S then. But as you can see, it's nearly at the top of S, second only to snipe, and I honestly wasn't expecting to put it that high at first. But there is something special about the engineer I discovered since then. So if you aren't aware, XXXL trap is bugged. Yeah, another upgrade that's bugged. And this bug's honestly kind of funny, if you're not the one being the victim of it. So you know how when the engineer places a balloon trap and it fills up, you collect it, and then after a few seconds, it takes a few seconds, it puts another one there, right? So did you know that like XXXL trap just like doesn't have a timer to put another one down? As in, like, literally, even if you haven't even collected the first trap that's full, the second a trap fills up, it instantly places one to take its place. And it doesn't matter if it's just, oh, did you wait 10 seconds since the last one was full? No, it just instantly smacks another one down on the track. What this essentially means is it's nearly impossible to die to something smaller than a bad as long as you have an XXXL trap on the ground and as long as the balloon going over it isn't camo. This in combination with cleansing foam makes XXXL trap basically the ultimate DDT rush counter, because the XXL trap can basically solo infinite DDTs. I don't know, maybe if they send them fast enough and send enough, eventually it won't be able to drop the trap down fast enough, but yeah, it should solo basically everything it touches, while also making 7,000 cash every time you fill it. This makes XXL trap just insanely good. The main reason that I didn't put engineer in S tier is because I thought towers in S tier and above have to be carry towers. They have to be the kind of towers where if you're not running one of these towers in your loadout probably isn't very competitively viable. And I think that's quite true for a lot of my S tiers. A lot of the off-meta strategies I've been trying have been carried by ice. And I was already considering putting engineer in S tier for that reason as well, because I was using it to hold together a lot of not very powerful strategies just because it was a form of income that also had some extra utility. But I just really wasn't sure if I should put it in S tier, because a lot of the towers in S tier, as well as being carry towers, were also towers that could deal bad damage. Good bad damage. If you count super brittle, in fact, all of my S tiers do really good bad damage. And I was looking at the engineer like, it doesn't do bad damage. And I think that's just the thing that knocks it out of S tier, just barely. But hey, even though it's not quite bad damage, I think literally being able to solo deal with basically an infinite amount of non-bad balloons while making money off of them, I think that's powerful enough to deserve S tier. Honestly, I almost kind of wish I delayed the recording of the engineer video just by a little bit, because I discovered this not very long after that. In fact, I had just unlocked XXL trap around the time I was recording that. I was trying to use it completely wrong though. I was expecting it was going to be good as a money-making option in the mid-late game, essentially to counter Zong rushes. Which, I mean, that makes sense, doesn't it? You save up enough money for an XXL trap, which is really greedy, but then, of course, that increases the chance that your opponent's actually going to rush you to punish you, and then they rush you and you just eat up their whole rush with an XXL trap that makes you thousands in the process. And even if you don't want to keep the XXL trap afterwards, you probably made about 21,000, so you can still just sell the XXL trap and you probably won't even lose that much money. You might even still make money. And obviously that sounds like a really good strategy in theory, and then I thought it would all going to fall apart when I realized, wow, I knew that 54,000 was a lot, but my god, it is hard to get 54k for Zongs, even if you, like, rush it, even if you greed. And so at that point, I thought, maybe XXL trap just wasn't it. Maybe it's just going to be used as, like, a panic option to make absolutely sure nothing leaks at the back. And other than that, it's just going to be useless. Because I really didn't think it'd be used to deal with DDTs. I thought that trying to decamo DDTs and then catch them in the trap would be really obnoxious, but actually it's a very powerful strategy. And then any weakness that strategy had got completely obliterated by this glitch that just lets it suck up basically an infinite amount of DDTs. And of course, due to the 4-round gap between Zongs and DDTs, getting an XXL trap up for DDTs is way more feasible. As well as that, I think I briefly mentioned this when I was talking about the engineer, back when I was saying what is in A tier before I realised I wanted to put it in S, but I realised that it does scale pretty well into the late game. Even though Sentry Champion isn't the best 5th tier, It's good enough DPS to be usable in the late game, and you want kind of every 5th tier you can get. And it also, of course, has the combo I already mentioned of how you can overclock your sentry champion to get a massive damage spike. But on top of that, there's Ultra Boost, and I said that I didn't think Ultra Boost was going to work. And I was a little bit wary when I said that. Like, at first glance, I really thought Ultra Boost would work in this game. Despite how overpriced and underwhelming it is, I thought that there's just so many other overpriced upgrades in BTD 6 that become so much more viable in battles that, sure, this might become way more useful in battles, especially because it's already on a good tower, and it's the upgrade after Overclock, which is probably one of the best abilities in the entire game. But the point at which I thought, nah, it's not going to work out, was once I realised it did not receive a price reduction. The vast majority of upgrades in this game receive price reductions. In fact, I tried to keep an eye out for that, although I still missed a couple. In fact, one of the big ones I missed is I didn't realise they made Chinook 5,000 cash cheaper in BTD Battles 2 compared to BTD 6, which was another part of the reason why I didn't realise how good Helis were. That was one of the few ones I missed, but one of the ones I didn't miss was the fact that they didn't discount Ultra Boost. I really thought they would because it costs 120,000. You look at the other upgrades and you're like, well, Superstorm is like 30k cheaper or whatever, and Ray of Doom's about 10k cheaper. The big one is Monkeynomics. I mentioned Monkeynomics literally costs 50,000 less and gives more money. So with all these other overpriced upgrades that I thought would make their comeback in Battles 2, they were usually things that had received a good price reduction. This one hadn't. This one still cost 120,000, a ridiculously high amount, not to mention that if it just cost 120,000, I still would say it might have a chance. But then, unlike a lot of other super expensive upgrades, it's not like you buy it and then you have the tower and then it destroys. You buy Ultra Boost and it does nothing until you use the ability like 10 times on one person. And as I said, I just really thought, by that time, you're dead, right? There's no way games are gonna go that long. I know we're in a late game meta, but how the hell could a game go so long in a competitive setting where you can not only get enough money to get the 5th tiers you're going to need to actually survive the late game, like your Mads and all that, and your Master Bombers, but then after you get all that, you're also going to have enough money left over to pay 120,000 for an Ultra Boost, and then have enough time after that to use the Ultra Boost ability multiple times. I thought, there's no way games are going to go that long. I know it's a late game meta, but that's so long, there's just no way. And well, lo and behold, there's a way. All that being said, Ultra Boost is definitely one of the weaker late game options, but occasionally games do go so long you can actually get up a new Ultra Boost and it's actually worth it. And that alone wouldn't be much of a point in Engineer's favour if it weren't for the fact that, again, it's already such an important and useful tower. At the end of the day, although the Engineer is missing the bad damage that I would usually need it to have to call an S tier tower, I still feel comfortable making it nearly the best tower in S tier, based off the fact that it just has a ridiculous amount of strengths in other areas. It has decamo, it has income, it has DDT counters in the form of XXL trap, which are way too good. It has overclock for massive tower synergy depending on what the tower is. Overclock not only works amazingly with rocket storms and with spike storms, but also helps contribute to the Master Bomber bug where it stacks damage too much. It makes that bug way more powerful. But then on top of that, it even has a 5th tier that has not insignificant DPS, that has the potential to actually reach insane DPS for its cost, in combination with Overclock. And even on top of all that, just generally doesn't have that bad early game Moab defense options in terms of sprockets with deconstruction. I was thinking, just because of the way the meta is right now, that there probably wouldn't be a tower that I think could get into S tier without decent bad damage. Because although other factors can come into play, I just thought that bad damage would be such a big factor that without it, I couldn't find a tower with so much utility that it would actually be a good substitute for bad damage. But no, the Engineer probably provides more utility than any other tower in BTD battles, which feels kind of nice, honestly. It kind of feels like the Engineer is finally doing the job it's supposed to do, being a utility tower, and a damn good one at that. So I feel pretty confident putting it here as the 4th best tower in the game right now. I'm moving the village up exactly 1 tier. It used to be 2nd from the top of B tier, and now it's 2nd from the top of A tier. There's 2 big reasons for this, and essentially, they're both things I already realised were good, they're just even more good than I realised. Those are Call to Arms / Homeland, and the Eco Boost from Monkey Town and Monkey City. So first of all, with Call to Arms and Homeland, I realized they would be strong towers. I said that was one of the reasons that the village was near the top of B tier, but the reason why I've still put the village in B tier is because it takes up a whole tower slot, and I was kind of thinking, unless you're running some kind of primary tower synergy loadout like with tax, you're probably not going to be using the village for anything really except Call to Arms. And I realized Call to Arms would be strong, but I just didn't think it'd be so strong it would carry the village that hard. What I didn't think about is the fact that just generally the best kind of towers in this meta are the kind of towers where an attack speed boost at the right time can either abuse bugs or just general unintended outcomes that might not even necessarily be bugs to make them way stronger than the developers could ever have expected. If you don't know what I'm on about with the not necessarily bug thing, you can boost the attack speed of a MAD, or you can boost the attack speed of a Spike Factory, and when you use the Rocket Storm or Spike Storm ability, the attack speed of those abilities will also be increased. And I believe that's an intentional thing, but the thing is, the developers didn't think it would be that powerful. They expected that you would do this and it would be a good idea and it'd be strong. They didn't realize it'd be so strong that we'd be having these games going to round 40. So any attack speed boost that we can put on a tower whenever we want that's significant enough is going to be really powerful in a meta like this, where the best towers in the game are all the best towers in the game because they abuse the fact that they can get attack speed boosts at unintended times. As I say, if we look at the top tiers, in the broken tier we have Dartling, which is broken because of Hydra Rocket Pod's laser shock bug, but also broken because of Rocket Storm with MAD being insanely good, and you can boost the attack speed of it to make it do stupid bad damage. And then we look at ninjas. The bug that actually breaks them involves attack speed and range, and the more attack speed and range you have, the more likely the bug is to trigger. And then of course Spike Factories, as I mentioned, it applies to stat Spike Storm. So yes, even though Overclock is kind of a more ideal option, that doesn't mean that Call to Arms and Homeland Defense aren't also amazing options to fulfill this role. But also, as I mentioned, there's Monkey Town and Monkey Village. I realized that this ability had changed in battles, but having used it, it was a bit disappointing to me at first. I really couldn't feel myself earning much more money, and I was thinking that, is a 0.2 increase per pink I send really a big deal? I know I send pinks fast, but I'm paying like 7,000 up front for this? And I was kind of skeptical that that kind of cash boost actually had a significant impact. I mean, I certainly thought that it would still be good enough. I still thought that it'd probably be better to buy a Monkey Town than to not buy a Monkey Town, but I thought that maybe it wasn't really worth the upgrade slots and you'd rather bring a tower that had a more useful bottom path. Having had some more games with Village though, where I've actually been able to get to the late game with them, wow, okay. I had a game on In the Wall where it really didn't feel like I was making that much more money at first, and then I look at my eco counter and I'm like, why am I making 7,500 every like 6 seconds? And it was only like round 31, which is pretty late, but usually by round 31 you'd be just about hitting 5,000 or something, at least in my experience. So having 7.5k eco is kind of insane. So giving Village gives you nearly infinite money in the late game, while also being really good for abusing the most powerful mechanics and bugs in the game right now. I think that there's no way I can put it in B tier. It has to go in A tier. And honestly, I wouldn't be that opposed to putting it in S tier. It just feels like it hurts a little too much to give up a full tower slot in this game. There's just so many different utilities that so many different towers can provide that it really hurts to give up a whole tower slot for Village. Well, that's the last significant movement I've done with this list so far. There is one more tower I moved. That tower was Alchemist. I didn't move it up a tier though, I just swapped its place with Mortar. Gave it a small nudge up because essentially there was a tower combo that I had heard of, which I was skeptical of at first, but I've now got to actually work quite well. You might have already heard of this because a decent amount of Bloons YouTubers have made videos on this, but it's the Total Transformation Druid combo. So essentially, I've been especially interested recently at looking at the kind of 5th tier upgrades I never use in Bloons Tower Defense 6. And trying to find a use for them. And two of them that really stuck out were Total Transformation and Plasma Monkey Fan Club. Both upgrades I essentially never used. But for the longest time I kind of held out this, okay, I don't think they're good, but maybe they are, I just don't know how to use them. The main thing is though, when I looked at them, it's like, okay, how do I use them differently though? They just seem to transform 5 things into another thing that's more powerful and then it goes away. how do I make this good? And so eventually I tried looking up like how people have been using total transformation, why some people are saying it's underrated. And essentially it's good with towers which can buff each other. That's because the tower specific buffs that the tower that gets transformed into a monster has do not go away when they transform. For example, if you surround a ninja with 20 shinobi ninjas and transform that ninja into a monster, it will still have the attack speed boost and PS boost from the shinobi ninjas, even though it's technically not a ninja at the moment. Now that's all well and good, but it's really hard to set up that many shinobi ninjas all in range of each other, and then also have the transformation transform them all. And after all that, don't get me wrong, it's kind of strong, but for a 50,000 cost upgrade that's not even a constant effect, it's an activated ability that runs out, I was pretty underwhelmed. And I also heard you could do this with druids, and I'm like, oh right, okay, druids with Pop Lust. And then I tried it, and I was pretty disappointed. First of all, I discovered that it can't actually transform Pop Lust druids themselves. You can only transform the druids that get the Pop Lust buff if they don't have the Pop Lust upgrade. So essentially you would get 5 Pop Lust druids and 5 unupgraded druids that get the Pop Lust buff but don't actually get any upgrades, and then they would be the ones that would transform into the monster. And yes, they would keep the Pop Lust buff and they'd be better than usual, but I still found that really underwhelming. I was starting to be really skeptical this combo was even good in the first place, or if it was just a cool thing someone found that you could do and then blew way out of proportion and tried to make it like it's an actual chimp strategy when it's not. But then I found the one piece of the puzzle I was missing. I shouldn't have been using unupgraded druids. I should have been using druids of Wrath with the Pop Lust buff, because not only does the Pop Lust buff carry over, but also the attack speed boost from Heart of Vengeance and Druids of Wrath. Now the Heart of Vengeance one isn't so relevant because you have to lose lives to get it, but the Druids of Wrath one, you don't need to lose lives, you just have to let them attack constantly for a bit. Now in fairness, I had already tried with Druids of Wrath and they weren't that impressive to me either, but the reason why they weren't is because I transformed them before I gave them long enough to build up attack speed. Now that I've actually used them properly, with the real setup, an Oben down to buff all the druids, 5 Pop Lust druids, 5 Druids of Wrath, wait to get the full attack speed boost up from them, and then hit total transformation. And I'll admit, with all that set up, you should do that all correctly. When you hit that button, that ability is probably the biggest power spike you can afford in a Chimps game outside of free play. Like, I genuinely don't think there's a single other combo in the game that allows you to provide more damage in a single moment than that combo. Again, with Chimps money without going into free play. But there was one big problem with it, and it was just, is this worth all the setup? Yes, this is an insane power spike that you can actually afford in a game of Chimps without going into free play. But all that said, to set up this power spike, you need an Oben, you need 5 Pop Lust druids, all in the range of the Oben. You then need 5 more Druids of Wrath, all in the range of the Oben, and also all 5 Pop Lust druids. And then you also need to save 50,000 for a total transformation Alchemist. And again, you're going to have to make sure you don't die while the ability's down, even once you set this all up. And then after all that, they can't see camo. And because you need to use Oben to max out damage of this combo, you can't really use Etienne either. So I really thought, yeah, this doesn't actually look like a good Chimp strategy because of that. Now, I might find I'm wrong with that. I need to try it on harder maps on Chimps. But what I am quite confident in is the reason why I've gone on this massive rant about a BTD 6 related thing in this BTD Battles 2 video. Bring this over to Battles. Again, completely different context. I think Druids are way more powerful in Battles, and not only that, they're very well suited to late game. As well as that, I think they take Alchemist buffs very well, and I think the Alchemist has a lot of hidden potential that we're not seeing used right now because of the fact that the 400 is bugged, so that it can't actually buff things. I should say the 4XX, because it doesn't matter if you crosspath it, it'll still be bugged. It can only buff 1 tower at a time, and also just generally because Alchemist is pretty difficult to use since you can never get it to see camo, and it takes up a whole tower slot for support. But I think this is where you'll get your late game with Alchemist, by pairing it with Druids and using this total transformation combo. In Battles, you're going to get a lot more money and a lot more time to set this all up, and Oben is already the best hero in the game right now. Now, with all that said, you might be like, well, okay, so Alchemists are actually going to be crazy good late game. If all that's true, why is it just being nudged up literally 1 spot, not even a tier, 1 spot on the tier list? Well, at the end of the day, that's 1 upgrade that costs 50,000, that's a not permanent ability that still takes a lot of setup. So I think that this could be significant. I'm not sure if it will be significant. But while we're talking about this, why don't we talk about the tower that I nudged down when I nudged the Alchemist up? the Mortar. I don't have much to say, so don't worry, but I just wanted to say that I know that one of my viewers is a very big fan of the Mortar and thought I should move it up on the tier list, and I want to. I really want to. I think in theory the Mortar's like an A tier tower, but all I can say is I've played with the Mortar a lot, and in practice it ain't working, Chief. Now that being said, it's still a B tier tower. It's still being ranked above Heli, it's still being ranked as an absolutely viable tower to be used competitively as long as you run some carry towers with it in your loadout. But at the end of the day, I'm not seeing the results I hoped for with Mortar, and I think it just comes down to, one, the fact that I thought it would at least be usable early game, and after lots and lots and lots of early games trying to get past it with just Mortar, I've discovered that no, it's not possible, not unless your opponent just doesn't rush you like they should early game. You have answers to what they do. You can get heavy shells if they send you blacks. You can get Bloom Buster if they send you pinks early on. You can get Signal Flare for camos. You do have an answer for just about anything they'll harass you with early game. The problem is you can't afford every answer, and if you're up against a smart opponent, they're just going to send you everything that could possibly kill you. You'll afford about 2 out of the 3 different solutions you need, and then you'll die because you couldn't afford the last one. You can get through the early game with Mortar, but to do it, you have to completely bank on your opponent just not noticing one of your weaknesses, which means I can't really call it a very competitive tower, not unless you use it purely for its applications in the late game. And that's what really sucks, because the one thing that the Mortar is bad at is bad damage. It's so amazing at everything else, but it's just so trash at bad damage, and bad damage is so relevant in the late game right now. When this meta changes, when the update hits, if we end up in a meta where bads aren't so important, I wouldn't even be surprised if Mortar shoots up to S tier. But because of how every game goes to bads, and the Mortar can't do shit against that bad. And while it does have some amazing upgrades in the meantime to survive DDTs and Zongs and all that in massive groups, they're all so expensive that you can't really go out of your way to buy them often because you need to focus on saving up for your bad damage so you don't die when round 30 hits. I really want to be wrong about Mortar here because I want it to go higher, but the more I play it, the more I think I can't justify putting it any higher. And I actually do think it's correct to say it's the worst tower in B tier. It's just barely above that kind of playable area that C is in. Again, I still think you can absolutely use Mortar competitively and seriously, but you need to run it with carry towers and you need to play it well. And it hurts to say that, to be honest. My god. Are we actually done? I spent way too long of my life on this. I actually get to move on to something new. Hey, what about the heroes? Okay, I don't really care about ranking the heroes because right now in battles there isn't really much thought into picking your hero. The flowchart goes like this. If you are running bombs, pick Biker Bones. If you are running druids, pick Oben. If you are running ninjas, pick Ocean Oben. If you're running tax, pick Gwendolyn. If you're running tax with ice, pick Scientist Gwendolyn. If you're running any other strategy that doesn't really synergize with your hero in any way, then either pick Oben for Wall of Trees DDT countering, or pick Quincy for just early game, even though I'm not gonna lie, I think Quincy's probably the worst. If you really want me to rank them, and I want to say I don't think the rankings really mean that much, because again, I think it's such a flowchart right now of if you are running this loadout, pick this hero. Oben S, Ocean Oben, probably also S, although I would rank Oben above Ocean Oben. I kind of don't like saying that because I like Ocean Oben, I think he's a lot more fun to use, but at the end of the day, the one strong Wall of Trees is a much better DDT counter, and being able to delay having to get DDT events is really kind of, relevant. Gwendolyn, A tier. Scientist Gwendolyn, B tier. I know that I use Scientist Gwendolyn all the time and I never use normal Gwendolyn. That's because I use Ice all the time and Scientist Gwendolyn is better with Ice. But other than that, I would recommend normal Gwendolyn over Scientist Gwendolyn. It honestly might be a big enough deal that Gwendolyn's cocktail right now is bugged to not be able to pop frozen balloons, that literally if they fix that bug, I would say that Scientist Gwendolyn would be A tier with normal Gwendolyn. Honestly, I think that's probably the case. It hurts so much that for whatever reason, you can't pop frozen balloons with Gwendolyn's cocktail that burns balloon. I really hate that bug. It's driving me up the wall. Also in B tier, below Scientist Gwendolyn, Biker Bones. I'm not so sure on that pit placement. It's just kind of like, in theory, he's like S tier. He's good with Bomb and Mortar,
which is the towers that I consider to be the worst in the game, and the one that's the worst that's still pretty competitive.
Normal Striker Jones goes in D. He's a lot worse than Biker Bones. Quincy also goes there. He's very cheap and decent early game, but that's about it. Very outclassed by Gwendolyn. And Cyber Quincy goes in F. Kinda hate to say that because I love the Cyber Quincy skin, but at the end of the day, he's practically objectively worse than Quincy. He has very few differences, and most of the differences just make him weaker. His explosive ammos are plasma damage instead of explosive damage, which means that they are able to pop black balloons, but unlike Quincy's arrows, they can't pop purple balloons, which, how many times have you been killed by purples? And now how many times have you been killed by blacks? Yeah, the purples are more relevant, so not being able to pop purples is a bigger deal. His level 3 ability does not increase his attack speed at all, it only increases pierce and range. And I was a little bit skeptical that it'd be as bad as people say at first, because people were saying that's awful, and I was thinking, well, I mean, if it's a good pierce increase, maybe that's decent. But no, it's pretty pathetic. It actually makes you way more rushable. And the only thing Cyber Quincy has that might be better than normal Quincy is the fact that his level 10 ability does more damage, but just in a smaller area. But then you're not using Quincy for late game power. So as much as I hate the fact that Cyber Quincy is so bad, considering I love that skin, yeah, I can't lie, it is definitely the worst hero in the game. So there, if you really cared about the hero rankings, there you go. They don't really matter that much, because again, it's more of a flowchart of if you're using this strategy, pick this guy. I mean, even though I put Striker Jones in D, at the end of the day, if you're running bombs and you don't have Biker Bones unlocked, still run Striker Jones. The only one I really don't think you have any reason to run, again, is Cyber Quincy, because I think you should literally use Quincy instead of him in every situation, because I already think the only situation you use Quincy in is if you have a loadout which has no synergy with any heroes, and you just want to get through the early game. And Cyber Quincy isn't even really that good in the early game, when Quincy actually is, because the level 3 ability, when it actually grants attack speed, is actually pretty good at countering early game rushes. Like Spaced Whites, the amount of times I've been able to cheat my way out of dying to Spaced Whites because I've just used Quincy ability and been able to be really greedy because of that is quite surprising. Anyway, enough about heroes. Let's move on to the interesting thing, the next video. What I'm hoping to do in the next video is cover my predictions for what might be good in the new meta once the patch does hit. Now, I'm not 100% sure if the next meta will change things enough that games will stop going to bads. I think it's a 50-50 by the looks of things. They are promising to remove just about everything that melts bads, but Tac Zone Super Brittle will still exist, so we might just see another Tac meta. And as well as that, although they say they're gonna fix the Ninja bug, the Ninja Sticky Bomb bug has been around for so long, and they think they've fixed Sticky Bomb, like from bugging out so many times, and then it's turned out they haven't fixed it, that I'm honestly a little skeptical that they're actually gonna be able to fix it. And if they can't fix it, then well, there you go. We're going to be in another bad meta. Quick thought I just want to add in there though, just to be a little bit less doom and gloom. Maybe that's the reason that the update has taken so long, when the game needs this update so desperately. The reason might be because they are trying to solve this Sticky Bomb bug once and for all, and I mean that was in their patch notes. It might be that that's what's taking up the majority of the time, this one bug fix. The official explanation is because the staff from Ninja Kiwi, they're just coming back from Christmas break and they haven't got the update done yet, they need time to make it. And yes, I can understand that, but I feel like there's probably a little bit more to it considering they've had a few weeks since, like, you know, the end of Christmas. I mean, we're getting towards the end of January and they still haven't dropped the update. So they are probably struggling with something right now. And considering that update didn't seem to have any new features planned in it, just bug fixes and balance changes, you would think it wouldn't take this long unless they were tackling something big. And as I say, even though it's just a bug fix, considering how pervasive Sticky Bomb bugs have been, I won't be surprised if that's the big thing they've been focused on. I just wanted to add that in because I don't really want to be all doom and gloom and all the developers have screwed it and all, oh, I hate Ninja Kiwi. But yes, it would definitely be terrible if after all this time they release the patch and then it just becomes a Ninja meta because they haven't actually fixed it again. But again, just for the sake of argument, this prediction for the new meta is going to be assuming that things go the other way and it turns out that games stop going to bads. They maybe still go to DDTs, but they don't quite go till round 30. And at that point, you can start saying, okay, what is going to change then? And I think that there are some towers that would be much differently placed on my tier list if we were in a meta where bads weren't so prevalent. And you already know that one of them is going to be Mortar, but there are actually quite a few more than just Mortar that I would love to talk about. Anyway, that'll be next time. Thank you for watching though, and let me know what you think of my tier list down below. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.